I guess I'll give a brief introduction about kind of what my goal was with this series of webinars. I kind of wanted to open up my playbook and just share with you guys some things that I've developed and implemented in my life and in my business over the years that have made a huge difference for me. So we're going to be doing 4 sessions, a couple presentations, and a couple workshops, and I really hope you guys get a ton of value, a ton of content out of this over the next few months. All right, we're 2:01, so we can get started. As people come, they can join in. So my name is Anthony Brown. I'm an associate broker. Like I said, I work out of Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, so over here on the East Coast. And just because we're going to be spending a bit of time together over the next little while, I kind of wanted to give you guys a bit of information just about me, some things that make me tick. The first thing is that I love coffee. Coffee is the thing that fuels my life. I drink it morning, noon, and night. People often joke that my coffee intake should be measured in pots, not in cups. I'm an avid golfer, so I love playing golf. Been playing golf since university and a little bit before, but I love the mental aspect of golf. I love the precision aspect. It's such a difficult game. I just really enjoy golf. That's my beautiful family. So I have 2 boys, Max and Donnie. They're 12 and 9. My wife, Pam. My dog, Spike, and yeah, I'm wearing my Austin Matthews jersey. That didn't age very well. And I love my New England Patriots. They're my favorite sports team, hands down. And I love selling real estate. I am absolutely hooked on selling real estate. And to chat a little bit about kind of how I got hooked on real estate, we have to go back a number of years. So I went to the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton, New Brunswick from 2004 to 2008. And during my first year of university, like many people, I lived in a dorm. And towards the end of that first year of university, I saw that a lot of my buddies were going out. They were renting houses, renting apartments. And I saw a bit of a business opportunity here. So I presented a business plan to my parents. I got a little bit of money from the bank of mom and dad. And I bought myself a 2-unit property that needed a little bit of work. And I was fully hooked. I thought that real estate was amazing as an investing platform. Especially after I had done some work to the property and I had it fully rented out, I was hooked. I thought real estate was pretty cool. And I also thought that my real estate agent had a pretty cool job. You know, he was just a young guy, drove a nice car, wore nice suits, was always kind of on the phone wheeling and dealing. And to a young guy in his first year of a business degree, I thought that seemed like a pretty cool gig. And I actually did my licensing course in Fredericton. So I went through the licensing course in New Brunswick when I was still in university. I didn't ever pursue the exam, but I went through the course when I was still in Fredericton. And, you know, I kind of put it on pause. So I graduated from the University of New Brunswick in 2008 and entered the corporate world into a senior management role. There was a lot of things I liked about running a company. I certainly learned a lot from my time in that role. And who knows, if things had gone differently, I might still work for that same company today. But on January 9th, 2009, my life took a pretty crazy turn. So on a day like any other, it was a Friday, I was walking up the side of the road right on the university campus, and a guy hit me from behind with his minivan. I flipped up over his hood, and my head shattered his windshield. I woke up from a coma about a week later, completely paralyzed on the left side of my body. So how they had described it to me was there had been a bleed right through the middle of my brain, and my brain had become disconnected from everything on the left side of my body. So if you took a marker and drew a straight line right down the middle of my body, nothing to the left side of that line worked. So my left arm didn't work, my left leg didn't work, my left eye didn't work, even the left side of my mouth didn't work. I remember sitting in my wheelchair, looking in the mirror of the bathroom in my hospital room, trying to smile, and the right side of my mouth would smile and the left side of my mouth just hung there, really droopy. A life-changing thing for sure. And I don't remember a lot about my accident. I don't remember a number of weeks after my accident. My memory kind of gets fogged in a little bit. But one of my first memories was they had sent a lady, she was an occupational therapist. They had sent her into my hospital room to try to teach me how to live a little bit more independently in my wheelchair. And she was just trying to teach me how to get dressed and undressed safely in my wheelchair, but I was having none of it. I looked at her and I said, with all due respect, I'm only going to be in this wheelchair for a couple days. And I'm sure for those couple days, the nurse can help me with my pants. Now, it was more than a couple days, but about a month after my accident, so the week leading up to my 25th birthday. So I was 24 when I got hit by the car in January, and I was turning 25 on Valentine's Day 2005. My birthday is February 14th. So about a month after my accident, I kind of got into my head that I was going to walk on my birthday. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but my leg had started to move a little bit. I was doing some physio exercises, and I got into my head that I was going to walk on my birthday. And they used to let us leave the hospital, so you could go home with your parents or your family for a weekend pass. So on Friday after my last medical appointment, I could go home to my parents' house or my sister's house, stay with them for the weekend, and then I would get taken back to the hospital before my first appointment on Monday. And I was at my sister's house in Dartmouth on February 14th, 2005, my 25th birthday. And I looked up at my mom and I said, "Mom, I'm going to walk today. Today's going to be the day I'm going to walk." And she looked at me and she knew I was serious. I was bound and determined. You see, when you become obsessed with something, when you believe in something so unequivocally that it climbs inside you, it becomes a part of your DNA. It's amazing the things that you can accomplish. So she looked at me and she could tell that I was dead serious. And she said, "Well, okay, if you're going to try that, can you at least let your dad help you?" And this is a video of me on my birthday, February 14th, 2005. And these are some of the first steps that I took. There's my wheelchair. I was just so happy. I was beyond thrilled. Amazing things can happen when you believe in something so fully that it climbs inside you. It becomes a part of you. Like I dreamt about walking. I woke up, it was the first thing I thought of. It climbed inside me. I became obsessed with it. I think we've kind of got this negative aura around the word obsessed, but I think being obsessed with things is good. I think that when I became obsessed with walking on my birthday, I think that was a good thing. I think that being obsessed with something, if it's a positive thing, I think that's a huge benefit for you guys. And we're going to talk a little bit about becoming obsessed with things when we talk about goal setting in the next workshop that we're going to do. Now, from that point on, so whenever I would go home on weekend passes to my parents' house or my sister's house, the wheelchair would stay in the trunk of the car and I would walk. But when I would go back to the hospital during the week, they used to make me stay in my wheelchair. So you weren't allowed to walk around the hospital as an inpatient until you had passed what was called a walking test. So they basically had to ensure that you could walk safely before they let you walk around the hospital. But I remember being terrified that during my time at the hospital, when I was in the wheelchair, I was going to forget how to walk. My brain was going to lose that connection that I had made with my left leg. So I used to go up in my hospital room and I would close the door and fold my wheelchair up against the wall and I would just walk back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, or around in circles. All I wanted to do was walk. So fast forward a couple of weeks, we're coming up to the walking test. And I'm a pretty competitive guy by nature, and I took this business of the walking test pretty seriously. I wanted to make sure that when I got this chance to do the walking test, I was going to pass it. So it was the day before my walking test, and I was up in my hospital room. I had my wheelchair folded up against the wall, and I was practicing some of the exercises I thought would be on the walking test the next day. And all of a sudden, there's a knock on my door. My door opens, and it's Patricia. She was my physiotherapist, and I kind of just froze like a deer in headlights in the middle of the room. I was absolutely busted, 100%. She kind of chuckled about it, left. We never really talked about it again. The next day was my walking test. So I wheeled down to the third floor physio gym, and sure enough, Patricia was in the far right corner. And as I wheeled over, I could see the obstacle course laid out in front of her, but I'll never forget she was holding these 3 canes. And after she explained to me how the walking test worked, she said, "Okay, Anthony, what cane do you want to try this with first?" And I kind of said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, there's a 4-prong cane, which has a big wide base. Most people try it with that first. If you can do it with the 4-prong cane, then you might want to try the 2-prong cane. And if you can do it with the 2-prong cane, then you try the single-prong cane." And I looked up at her and I said, "I do not need a cane." I put the brakes on my wheelchair and stood up and walked and passed that walking test with flying colors and never looked back. Now, naturally, the next thing on my mind was, okay, I can walk. Now, how the heck am I going to play golf? When I was discharged from the hospital for the final time in spring of 2009, the biggest limitation that I had and still have today is I have no use of my left hand, or very limited use of my left hand. But my left shoulder worked a little bit, my left arm worked a little bit, and I kind of got it in my head that if I could somehow get the golf club to stay in my left hand, I'd be able to play golf. I became obsessed with it. I thought about it morning, noon, and night. I dreamt about it. Again, that word obsession. I became obsessed with figuring out how to golf. So I went to an indoor driving range with a golf club. I took string, Velcro, and duct tape. The first thing I tried was I tried tying my hand onto the golf club. That worked okay, but it wasn't very practical. The next thing I tried was I tried Velcroing my hand onto the golf club. That worked okay. It was a little bit more practical, but didn't really have the hold that I needed. And then the last thing I tried was I actually tried duct taping my hand to the golf club, which actually works surprisingly well. But if you're over the ball with a 9-iron and you decide you need an 8, it's going to take a while for you to switch clubs. And then a pro that I know told me about this thing called Power Glove. And Power Glove is a grip aid that's designed to teach people how to hold the golf club properly. So it has this little loop on the top of the glove that pins the club in your hand in the right position. But for me, it actually served the purpose of keeping the golf club in my left hand. And in June of 2009, with an ear-to-ear grin that I can't even describe to you, I played my first round of golf. Now, my recovery progressed pretty well from that point on. So I worked really hard. I had a great team of doctors and therapists. I had a lot of support from friends and family. I was very fortunate and I worked really hard. I had a very good recovery. So there came a time where after I was discharged from the hospital, I stayed with my parents for a while. And then there came a time where I was going to be able to go back out and live on my own again. And then eventually there came a time where I was going to be able to go back to work. And I said, you know what, by golly, I've always thought about selling real estate. I used to do the real estate career simulators all the time where you could test drive a career in real estate. They used to have them as recruiting tools for brokerages. I was obsessed with selling real estate. And I said, that's it. If I'm going to have a second chance at a career here, I'm going to sell real estate. I was going to do it. The only issue was that I didn't have a driver's license. So when you have an accident like the one that I had with a brain bleed, a traumatic brain injury it's called, you actually have to go through the driving program at the hospital to get your license back. So you have to redo your licensing, your road test and everything. But that wasn't going to stop me. So I went down to the bus station. I got myself a Metro Transit pass, put on my suit and tie, went down to the real estate commission, wrote my license and passed, and I was ready to start selling real estate. Now, I love watching the people around me. So I love learning from the people around me. And it didn't take me long. When I started selling real estate, I noticed that there was a big difference between what the top producers in my office were doing versus what everyone else was doing kind of on a daily basis. So I said, if I'm going to do this, I want to do this well. I want to do this very well. I want to be a top producer. So I started kind of mirroring the things that I saw them doing. I did door knocking. I did open houses. I did geographical farming. I did just listed, just sold ads. I was doing all these things. The only issue was I was doing them all from the bus. But it wasn't going to stop me. I was obsessed with selling real estate. But I'll tell you, I used to get some funny looks. So in my first year in real estate, I did open houses almost every Saturday and Sunday. And of course, I would have to take the bus to the open house. So here I am, I have my briefcase, I'm wearing a nice suit, I have my box of flyers, and I have my 3 open house signs. Now remember, I can only use one hand. I have 3 open house signs with me, and they're in those metal A-frame holders. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. And I'm loading everything up on the bus Saturdays and Sundays, and these things are clanging and banging and causing an awful ruckus. I got some pretty funny looks on my way to open houses. And another time I remember, so my first office when I started selling real estate was up a little bit of a hill from where I would catch the bus. And I had this box of postcards that I had to take down to Canada Post to mail out. And of course, I had to take the bus down to Canada Post. So here I am coming down this hill, and there's a little bit of snow, but it's like wet, slippery snow. So I'm walking down. Of course, I have dress shoes on, probably not the brightest choice, but I'm slipping and sliding. I was on my face. I was on my butt. By the time I got on the bus, I was covered head to toe in snow, and I was soaking wet. I got some pretty funny looks that day. But again, I didn't care. I was just so happy to be doing it. I was thrilled to be selling real estate. And it was about halfway through my second year in real estate. I got my driver's license back towards the end of my first year. That helped a lot. And then it was about halfway through my second year that I found my true calling in this business. I discovered the art of cold calling. And man, to this day, I still love cold calling. So what I would do is I would go and I would pick out a neighborhood that I wanted to call. And I would go on Google Maps and I would look up every street name for that neighborhood. And I would go on Canada411.ca or 411.ca and do a reverse address lookup. And I would print out on 11 by 17 paper 3 columns of names and numbers and just start dialing top left to bottom left, top middle to bottom middle, top right to bottom right. I would call leads. I would call cold call every day. Now, a lot of our business now has moved from cold calling to online leads, but I'm still on the phones 7 days a week. I love dialing for dollars. That was my first true love in real estate. So that's a little bit about how I got started in the business. But what I wanted to do with some of the time that we had today was I wanted to chat a little bit about the things that I've gone through in my life and some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. You see, I feel truly blessed to have been paralyzed when I was 24. I know that might sound like a bit of a paradigm shift, and I am going to challenge some of your beliefs on things like goal setting and time management as we go through this. But I really think that in my last 20 years of life, I've got to learn more about life than some people get to learn in their entire lifetime. And I love being able to share that with people. I love being able to help people with the things that they're going through in their life. I love being able to share that with other people. So some of the key lessons that I learned through my accident and my recovery. And the first thing I want to talk about is goals. And goals are important. Listen, I grew up as a competitive athlete. I competed at a national level in 2 sports. My parents are very goal-driven people. My dad runs his own companies. I was brought up in a very goal-driven environment. But through my experience in the rehab hospital, they shed a different light on goal setting and managing your goals in that environment. The rehab hospital was a very goal-driven environment. So it's all about setting goals for your recovery, working towards those goals, rebaselining, maybe realigning goals, or if you're exceeding your goals, trying to extend them or elevate them. But I'll never forget when it came to the goals that I had in the rehab hospital, they would all go very well except for this little guy, my left hand. My left hand just wouldn't work. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much work I put into it, I just couldn't get my left hand to work. And it was my occupational therapist who said something to me one day that I'll never forget. She said, Anthony, don't focus so much on the end result. She said, if you're showing up every day, if you're putting in that consistent effort, it's inevitable that you're going to make forward progress. It's inevitable that you're going to move towards your goal. You see, goals are important, but it's the daily actions, it's the consistent effort that get us to our goals that are equally as important. And there's a great tagline, so I've read this in a number of business books. If you focus on the front line, the bottom line is going to take care of itself. So in our business, again, I'm in real estate, so I can relate to your business. If you focus on your clients, if you focus on bringing value to your database, if you focus on your lead gen, if you focus on delivering exceptional value to your clients, your gross commission goals will take care of themselves. Don't get so focused on that gross commission or that transaction number. Focus on how many genuine contacts you're making every day. Focus on how many online leads you're contacting every day. Focus on how many touches you have with your database every day. If you're focused on these daily consistent actions, it's inevitable that you're going to move forward towards your goal. And there's an amazing theory. So the be, do, have theory, and I attribute this to Zig Ziglar. There's a lot of trainers, a lot of motivational speakers that have used this over the years, but he's the first one that I know of that talked about the be, do, have theory. And the be, do, have theory shows that there's a natural flow to life. And the natural flow is to be, and then to do, and then to have. But what the theory also says is that most people are trying to live their life backwards. So most people are trying to have before they do or be. So let's look at an example. I might say, you know what? Once I have more time, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to be a physically fit person. Or once I have more time, I'm going to volunteer for my kids' sports teams and I'm going to be a great dad. Or once I have more money, I'm going to donate some money to charity and I'm going to be a generous person. But if we look at it that way, there's a good chance that we're never actually going to achieve our goal because we're focused on it backwards. So let's flip it around to the natural flow of life, to be and then to do and then to have. So I'm going to decide today that I'm going to be a health conscious person. So I'm going to do the things that a health conscious person would do. And then whatever I have, I'll have as a result of that. Or I'm going to decide today that I'm going to be a great dad. I'm going to be a great dad. So I'm going to do the things that a great dad would do. And then whatever I have as a result of that. Or I'm going to be a generous person. I make a certain amount of money every year, so I'm going to donate a certain percentage of that to charity. And then whatever I have as a result of that. It is an incredibly powerful law in our lives that's always present. You might not always see it, but it's always there. And I didn't know it at the time, but when I started in real estate, I played right into the be, do, have theory. I decided on day one that I was going to be a top producing agent. So I did the things that I saw other top producing agents doing. And now everything that I have in my business, I have as a result of that. Be, do, have. It's incredibly powerful. Another great thing that I learned as a result of my accident and going through my recovery is to focus on the things that you can control. So one tricky thing about a brain injury is there's really no way for them to predict a recovery. So a lot of the recovery for the brain depends on how the trauma happened, the location of the bleed, and how the brain can actually heal itself. And that bothered me for a long time. I was a young guy. I wanted to know when I was going to get better. When would I walk again? When could I leave the hospital? When could I live on my own again? I wanted to know when all these things could happen. And really, there was just very little that they could tell me because of the lack of predictability in a brain injury. And I remember I was thinking one day that I was wasting a lot of time worried about all these things that I couldn't control. And I decided that day, I said, you know what? I'm going to focus all my attention, all my energy, everything that I have into the things that I can control. I'm going to work as hard as I can when I go to physio. I'm going to work as hard as I can when I go to occupational therapy. I'm going to work as hard as I can when I go to my memory classes. Whatever I'm doing, I'm going to put every bit of energy and enthusiasm and effort that I have into that. And what I realized is that I was wasting a lot of time and energy on things outside of my control. There's a great formula. So E plus R equals O. And I know it kind of sounds a bit like math. I actually love math, but it's really not math. So E stands for the events in our lives. R stands for our response. Notice I don't say reaction. If you react to something, you don't control it. If you respond to something, you control it. And the O stands for the outcome. So even though we have no control over what happens to us in our lives, that's the E, we always have some degree of control over our response. So in turn, we always have some degree of control over the outcome. So if we control our response to the things that happen to us, we always have some degree of control over the outcome. E plus R equals O, incredibly powerful. And really, you want to focus on controlling the controllable. So I took this from Tom Brady. Yes, I'm a huge Michigan fan. I'm a huge Patriots fan. I'm a huge Tom Brady fan. But Tom Brady had a sports psychologist when he was back at the University of Michigan, Greg Harden. And there's a famous story about Tom Brady going in to meet with Greg. A lot of people think that Tom Brady was always a superstar. He really wasn't. When he first started at Michigan, he didn't really get any playing time. And he went into Greg one day and said, Greg, I don't know if I'm ever going to get any first string reps here. I don't know if I'm ever going to get a snap in any games. I'm thinking I might want to enter the transfer. He actually thought about transferring out of Michigan to go to another school where he would get more playing time. And Greg said, you know what, Tom? You have no control over how many reps you get with the first team offense. You have no control over how many reps you get in a game. That's all the coaching staff. What you do have control over is what you do with the reps that you're given. He said, if you know the coaches are watching you when you're warming up, make sure it's the best warm-up you've ever had. If you're saying something in the locker room, make sure it's the best thing you've ever said. If you get 3 snaps in practice with the first string offense, make sure those are your best 3 snaps you've ever had. If you get 3 snaps in a game, make sure those are the best 3 snaps you've ever had. You really need to focus on controlling the controllables. I think that's a great lesson. Another great thing that I learned through my accident and my recovery is to embrace change and welcome it gracefully. You see, after I was paralyzed, the left side of my body absolutely didn't work. My left hand still doesn't work. I can move my fingers a little bit. That's all. My life was 100% changed. And there was a time where I was very resistant to that. I didn't want to be paralyzed. I didn't want to be in a wheelchair. I didn't want things to change. I was very happy with my life. I was running a company. I had a place in Fredericton that I loved. I didn't want my life to change. But what had happened had happened. And the more I put my back up, the more I resisted that, the less likely I was ever going to be to move forward. You see, in life, the only constant is change. If you think about it, the only thing that stays the same in our lives is that things are going to change. That's the one constant. So don't spend time with your back up, resisting. That just holds you back. Embrace change and welcome it gracefully. And I'll tell you guys a good story. So, real estate story. So I've been in real estate a long time now, 15 years. So I remember before we had fax to email, I remember faxing offers to the other agent to get signed. And then fax to email came out. That was a huge thing. And then we had electronic signatures. And I was pretty resistant when electronic signatures, I mean, it seems silly now, but when electronic signatures first came out, I was pretty resistant. I had a pretty good business going. I was cooking along at a pretty good pace. I didn't really want to adapt that change. I was kind of like, no, you know what? I'm pretty good. And then I was put in a situation where my clients were backpacking in Europe and we got a really strong offer on their house and they had access to their emails, but they didn't have a fax machine, a printer, or a scanner. And I said, hang on now, there's this new thing. Let me just figure it out. And I quickly went back through all the emails, set up a profile, uploaded the documents, figured it out, and sent it to them to sign electronically. And now I can't imagine what my business would be like without electronic signatures. But just think about how much easier those few months would have been with the deals that I was doing if I had been an early adapter of electronic signatures. Especially in real estate, things are always changing. Don't resist. Knowledge is power, guys. So this is something that I picked up early on in my recovery. So I remember thinking, I didn't know anything about brain injuries. In hindsight, I knew very little about the human brain. And the 7th floor of the rehab hospital where my room was had a patient lounge down at the end of the hall. And it was full of books about brain injuries. It was full of books about hemiplegia, living with only the use of one hand. There was all these things there. And what I realized as I spent more time in the library and read more about all these things, I was able to move forward so much quicker. I was able to progress so much better the more I learned about what I was going through. And to this day, I'm a chronic learner. I love reading. I read and listened to 106 books last year. I'm addicted to learning. I love it. But there's an amazing stat. So 75% of high school graduates in North America, so these are people that have already graduated from high school, will go on to read one book or less per year for the rest of their lives. And this stat, I've done this presentation hundreds of times. This stat still blows me away. 3/4 of the people in North America that graduate from high school will go on to read one book or less per year for the rest of their lives. Compare that to the top income earners in North America. So the super rich class of income earners in North America, they read on average one book per week. So 52 books a year. And top executive level employees of Fortune 500 companies average 60 books per year. It's statistically proven that knowledge is absolute power. Read good books. If you want a book list, send me an email after we're done here and I'll send you my book list. But read good books. There's some great real estate books. Deliver the Unexpected by Richard Robbins is a great book. The World's Greatest Salesman, Og Mandino, is a great book. The Best Referral I Ever Received is a great real estate book. There's all kinds of them out there. Read good books. And the other thing I noticed was that if I spent more time listening to the people around me, so when I was in the hospital, everyone knew more about my situation than I did. So the doctors knew more, the therapists knew more. Heck, even the janitors at the hospital knew more about what I was going through than I did. And if I spent more time with my mouth closed and my ears open, I was able to pick up so much more information. I was able to learn so much more. Larry King has a great quote. He says, I remind myself every morning, nothing I say this day will teach me anything. So if I'm going to learn, I must do so by listening. I mean, like, think of that. Nothing that you could say today will teach you anything new. If you're going to learn something new, you have to do it by listening. And if you can't remember that, just remember you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Try to listen twice as much as you talk. Another thing that I picked up along my journey was that things like adversity, challenges, and failure, these are all good things. And again, that might be a bit of a paradigm shift. You might say, oh, like that's foolishness. But they really are. Adversity, challenges, failure, hardships, these are all good things. Most of us spend our lives avoiding adversity. We try to make sure that everything goes perfectly. And I mean, that might seem sensible. And when things do go wrong, when we hit that third red light in a row, or when something else goes wrong, or the blender breaks, or the toast burns, whatever, you say, how could this happen to me? Why me? Why today? And most of us will spend the majority of our lives trying to make sure that things don't go wrong. We want to make sure that things go properly. But that's backwards thinking. I really think that that's backwards thinking. So if you look back in history, history shows us that it's adversity that creates opportunities. It's during these difficult times, it's during these challenging times that we can make our greatest progress. You see, when life's going along smoothly, when you're just trucking along, you're not compelled to grow. You're inside your comfort zone. It's only when you're outside your comfort zone, when you're pushed out of that you're really compelled to grow as a person. And that's what we need. We almost need to put ourselves in these situations where we push ourselves outside of our comfort zone if you want true growth. There's a Chinese proverb that a gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. And I think that's bang on. I think that we need to be pushed to our limits to know what we're fully capable of. You have no idea what you could do. I've been up on stage now sharing my story in front of thousands of people. I had no idea that I could do that before my accident. I had no idea the type of person I could be, the type of father I could be. I had no idea the type of real estate agent that I could be until I was pushed to that. You really have to put yourself in situations that push us outside of our comfort zone. Because it's these challenges, it's life's obstacles that really test us. So instead of cursing things when they go wrong, instead of saying why me, why today, cussing them out, you say, like, you know what, okay, I can do this. I just showed myself that I can get through this. What do you got for me next, life? What else do you have for me? Let's relish a bit of adversity. Look forward to some challenges. I know it's a bit of a paradigm shift, but I really think that pushes you outside your comfort zone, and you won't know what you're capable of until you're there. Booker T. Washington has a quote. I love this. Success is to be measured not so much by the position that one has reached in life, but by the obstacles which he has overcome. I really think that it's not the destination. I think, we're all going to end up in the same place at some point. Actually, I think at some point someone will live forever. I've been reading a lot about this stuff. I think that at some point someone's going to live forever. I don't know when that's going to be. Tony Robbins has a great book called Life Force. If you're into like biohacking and longevity, check it out. Phenomenal book. But it's not about where we're going to end up. I really think it's about what we do and the impact we have on the way there. I really think that it's what we do, the impact we have on the way to that final destination. So instead of cursing challenges, if something goes wrong and you overcome it, give yourself a pat on the back. Say, hey, listen, we did that. What's next? Right? Maybe you lose a deal because of bad financing or a poor home inspection, right? You say, oh man, why me? I needed that commission check. Instead of saying that, say, you know what? I can sell that again. I can find a new buyer for that property. And when you do that, give yourself a pat on the back and say, hey, what else do you have for me? What do you got next, life? And tied into this kind of concept of adversity, challenges, and failure being good things is a concept that I love, and it's called failing forward. And this is something that I learned through my ties. So I love my ties. I'm not wearing one today, but I'm a big tie guy. I have a closet full of them. And when I started selling real estate, I knew that if I was going to wear my ties to work, I'd have to learn how to tie them with one hand. And I like a nice square knot. It has to be a true Windsor knot. And there was no resources. So when I looked, there was no resources on how to tie a tie with one hand. It wasn't in any of the books. I couldn't find any resources online. And I said one day, I said, you know what? I'm going to figure this thing out. So I sat down on my couch and I put a tie around my neck and I said, Anthony, you will not take off that tie until it's tied in a true Windsor knot, nice double Windsor knot with one hand. And this was the day I really saw this concept of failing forward. You see, I tried and failed miserably. I tried again, failed again, tried again, failed again, tried, failed, until eventually 8 hours later, a full work day later, I took that tie off, tied in a true Windsor knot with one hand. And what I realized was that every time I tried and failed, I got a little bit better. I tried again, failed again, and I got a little bit better. I got a little bit better. You see, I don't think that failure I think that failure is not the opposite of success. I think it's the quickest path to reach success. And I went through this again when I started cold calling. Man, if I could go back and listen to that first cold call I did, I'm sure it was miserable. I probably stumbled over my words. I don't even know if I dialed all 7 numbers the first time. But every time I did it, I got a little bit better. And now I train real estate agents all across the country on their scripts. Every time I did it, I got a little bit better and a little bit better. You see, failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is actually the quickest way to reach success. And I tell this story about Babe Ruth. So Babe Ruth was the greatest home run hitter of his time by far. But you know what Babe Ruth did more times than anyone else during his time in baseball? Struck out. He had more strikeouts than any other player in Major League Baseball at the time. So he hit more home runs, but he also struck out more. And a reporter was asking him after a game when they were doing a post-game press conference. They said, Babe, like when you're up at the home plate, do you ever think about striking out? And he goes, heck no, I don't think about striking out. He says, I think about hitting home runs. You see, every time he swung at a pitch and missed it, he got a little bit better. He learned a little bit more about that pitcher. Every time I tried to tie that knot in my tie with one hand and failed, I got a little bit better. Every time I cold called and destroyed my script. My first calls were probably horrible, but I got a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. I really think that failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the quickest way to reach success. If you want to be great selling real estate, the best thing you can do is screw up a whole bunch of times, make a bunch of mistakes really, really quickly, learn from them, and get better. I really think that. Another great thing that I learned through my accident, my recovery, is that there's nothing in the world that can replace optimism and positivity. And I will say, just my nature, like I'm naturally a pretty optimistic, pretty positive guy. But after my accident, especially when I was still in the wheelchair and I was in the hospital, there were some pretty dark days. There were some days that were pretty tough on me mentally. And what I noticed as I observed the people around me, doctors, therapists, my parents, friends that came to visit me, if I was happy, if I was smiling, if I was feeling good, they were happy. They smiled, they felt good. But as soon as I started to have a bad day, as soon as I stopped smiling, as soon as my optimism left, as soon as my positivity left, all of a sudden they weren't so happy. They weren't so optimistic. They weren't so positive. And the day really started to drag on. And I said, Anthony, what right do you have to be anything but grateful for the fact that you're alive? Think about this. I was walking on the side of the road. A guy hit me with his minivan. My head shattered his windshield. I was in a coma for a week. If he was going just a little bit faster, just a little bit slower, if he hit me just 1 inch to the right, 1 inch to the left, if the wind was 5 kilometers an hour faster, if any one thing changed, if any one circumstance changed in that situation, I could be dead. What right do I have not to be happy every day? And I put together a highlight reel about how happy I was going to be. And I started to play that. So when I would get sad, when I would feel down, I would play that highlight reel and think about how darn grateful I was to be alive. And after my accident, so going further into life, I actually became obsessed. So I read and studied happiness for the better part of a year a while ago. And there's two things that fascinate me, or I guess there's one thing that fascinates me a lot about happiness. I think that happiness is something that everyone truly wants, and yet so few people truly have. By the way, the purest form of happiness is joy, and joy is defined as happiness that comes from within. So I've put together these two happiness myths. So I think that there's a couple different reasons why people aren't as happy as they could be. And the first is that they're looking for happiness like it's a thing. It's something they can get, something they can buy. But happiness is an intention. Happiness is a state of being. Remember, let's go back to be, do, have. So powerful. You need to decide today that you're going to be a happy person. And then you'll do the things. If you're truly a happy person, you'll do the things that a happy person will do. And then whatever you have as a result of that. Be, do, have. Unbelievably powerful. My second happiness myth is I think that people are looking for the things around them to make them happy. Like, I want my spouse to make me happy. I want my job to make me happy. I want my car to make me happy. Did you know that 90% of happiness comes from within? So 90% of your happiness comes from inside you. Only 10% of your happiness can even possibly come from the things around you. So if you're looking for the things around you to make you happy, if you're looking for your partner to make you happy, your job to make you happy, your bank account to make you happy, whatever, even if they're making you as happy as that could possibly be, you're only ever going to be 10% happy. 90% of your happiness comes from inside. So I think that you need to choose to be happy. Another great thing that I learned as a result of my accident is that time off is just as important as time on. So I'll take you guys back into my hospital room. So with a brain injury, there's a lot of impairment on your executive functioning. So a lot of your planning, a lot of your strategizing. So in the rehab hospital, everything's really designed to take you back to the basics. So they have a day planner on the front door of your hospital room, and they schedule out in your day planner all your appointments for the day to get you used to planning again. And I'll never forget, every afternoon on my daily agenda on my door, they had nap time. And especially after I was walking, I was down in the physio gym, I didn't want to be laying in bed. I didn't want to be napping. Like, man, come on, I want to be doing 2-a-days. Like, get me down to the gym, give me some weights. But as I read more about the human brain can actually only recover during times of absolute rest. So your brain can only ever recover during times of absolute rest. And that was a huge life lesson for me, that time off, so my nap time in the afternoon, was equally as important, if not more, than my physio appointment, than my memory training, than my occupational therapy. And that's been a great lesson for me in my work-life balance. And I say balance, I kind of chuckle when I say that. I've had my struggles. So both my kids are athletes. I coach 2 soccer teams right now. I coach a football team. I've had a very good work-life balance, and I've had a very, very bad work-life balance. You can ask my wife. But what I've learned is that you need to make your schedule. And when you make your schedule, you have to book your time off first. So if you're planning out your year, book your vacations first. If you're planning out your month, book your Fridays for golf first. I try to golf every Friday. Book your weekends off first. Book your date night first. As you're planning your week, book the time off. So even from volunteer work, book time off from coaching sports. Book time off from work. Book time off from all these things before you book your time on. And what you're going to see, there's a few amazing things that happen. When you make your schedule and you book time off first, I say exceptions are okay. So, listen, I'm not perfect. I'm not up here saying that I don't ever make exceptions. But when I do make an exception, it's something that I deem to be acceptable, not someone else. So I'm not operating under the constraints that other people put on my schedule. They're things that I deem to be acceptable exceptions. And what you're going to see is that when you have this set schedule, when you book your time off first, it limits your time available for certain things. So it limits your time available to meet with clients. It limits your time available to volunteer for your kid's school. It limits your time to volunteer at the soup kitchen or whatever it is you do in the community. Having a set schedule where you book your time off first limits your time available for things. And by limiting your time, you actually seem busier and you have more free time. And what happens is people are so grateful when they do get your time. And people always say, when I do this presentation, people often say, well, Anthony, aren't you worried they're going to go work with another real estate agent? Not really. I mean, think about your dentist or your doctor or your lawyer. If you call up your dentist and say, hey, doc, like I need a tooth cleaning, I can come over at 8 p.m. on Thursday. Does that work? They're going to laugh. They're going to say, no, we have the, 2 Tuesdays from now at 9:30 in the morning. If not that, then a month later. You don't go and find a new dentist. Your clients won't leave you because you're not available 24/7. I think there's this real stigma in our industry that we have to be available 24/7. If you are available and you always give two options, so listen, I can't do 8 p.m. Thursday. How about 4 p.m. on Thursday or 9 a.m. Friday morning? Which of those is better for you? Right? You don't have to jump at the drop of a hat to please everyone. Set your schedule, and we're going to work through a bunch of the stuff when we do the time management workshop, like building an ideal week, an ideal month, and an ideal year. Build out the framework for what an ideal week looks like for you, and then try to fit everything in that ideal framework, and make sure you book your time off first. You will be busier, you'll be happier, and you'll have more free time, I guarantee it. And through this, I've learned that I can be a super realtor. This is really cheesy, I know. A super realtor, a super husband, and a super dad all at the same time. I really have. I have so much time for my kids. I have so much time for my wife. I have so much time for my business because of my time management. And here's a little tidbit of information. This is a bonus thing. So I put this in here. Wake up at the same time every day. So I've studied energy. The last presentation that I'm going to do in this series is on peak performance energy. If you wake up at the same time every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, regardless of what time you go to bed at night, you will have a more consistent level of energy over a longer period of time. So you might be more tired for a day, but over a longer period of time, you'll have a more consistent energy. So wake up at the same time every day. Put it in your calendar what time you're going to get ready for bed, what time you're going to be asleep, and what time you're going to be up the next morning. The next two things that I want to talk about, these are the two biggest, I would say, most valuable lessons that I took from my time in the hospital and my journey through my recovery. And the first thing is to focus on giving. And this is a lesson that I learned from my mom and dad. So my mom and dad are pretty busy people. And they dropped everything. After my accident, they dropped everything to give as much of them as they had to me whenever I needed it. And one thing that they said, so when I was moved into the rehab hospital the first time, I was on the wait list for a single room, for a private room. And I was in a room that was a ward. So a ward has 4 patients in it, and it's like a shared room. And when it came time for bed, the visitors have to leave. So you're not allowed to have overnight visitors in a ward. But I'll never forget, my mom settled down in the chair next to me. And when the nurse told her it was time to go, she said, absolutely not. She said, I promised my son when he was still in his coma that I was going to be with him every night, whether he needed me or not. And short of you calling security and dragging me out of here, I'm going to stay. They were so focused on giving everything that they had to me that it really, it left a huge impact on me. You see, most of us want to get things, right? Most of us want to get things. We want to have things. That seems pretty natural. And I was very much like that before my accident. I wanted to get this, get that, have this, have that. But really, it's giving that starts the receiving process. And it was a hand to crib that really instilled this in me. So when I was still in the hospital, I was in my wheelchair. I was down in the 7th floor lounge where I mentioned the library before. And I'll never forget, there was this older guy. His name was Rick. And Rick had had a pretty severe stroke. And although he didn't have a lot of physical impairments, he had some pretty significant cognitive impairments. And he was sitting at a table staring at a crib board. And I wheeled over to him and I said, hey man, do you like to play crib? And he said, I think so, but I don't really remember how to play. And I said, well, if you want to, I'd love to give you a refresher. I love playing crib. And he said, I'd like that. So as I dealt out a hand of crib and we played through it, and I kind of refreshed him on the rules, he would remember. And he lit up like a Christmas tree. Talk about joy. This was the happiest I've ever seen someone. But what I observed was that as we would shuffle the cards to deal out the next hand, he would forget again. So I sat there for hours with this guy, playing the same hand of crib over and over again, just to see that look in his eyes when he would remember, when it would click. And I really learned that it's giving that starts the receiving process. So the more you give to people, it's a natural law of reciprocity. The more you give to people, the more you're going to get back in return. It's inevitable. But it's giving that starts that receiving process. Again, we have to shift our paradigm. It's easy in our business to think about getting deals, getting a listing, getting commission check. But if you focus on giving first, if you focus on giving value, giving information, giving is what starts the receiving process. And I mentioned Richard Robins's book earlier, Deliver the Unexpected. So Rich was an early mentor of mine when I started in real estate. He has this thing called the potluck math theory. And I love the potluck math theory. So the potluck math theory says that, well, everyone knows what a potluck dinner is. So at a potluck dinner, everyone kind of brings a dish to share with everyone that's going to be there. But at a potluck dinner for 10 people, you don't just bring enough food to feed one person. You bring enough food to feed the whole group. So at a potluck dinner for 10 people, what ends up happening is you end up with enough food to feed about 100 people. And everyone leaves with leftovers. You take your dish back with a scoop of everyone else's food, and whoever hosted the potluck dinner has enough leftovers that they eat for the next week. Think about that concept. If we brought that to every interaction in our business, in our life, every time we talk to our partner, every time we dealt with our kids, every client, every listing, if you bring more to every relationship, every interaction that can possibly be consumed, what's going to happen will be amazing. The leftovers will feed people for weeks. And the potluck math theory, I love that. The last thing I want to talk about before we open up to some questions and just a conversation is about forgiveness. I think in life we have to be quick to forgive. So my recovery, like I said, progressed pretty well. I worked really hard. I had great doctors and I had a pretty good recovery. But even years after my accident, when I would think back and reflect on the accident, there was always this kind of animosity, this feeling of whatever you want to call it. But whenever I would think about the guy that hit me with his van, I would say, like, what was he doing? What could he have possibly been thinking? He was playing with his radio. Like, how could that have been more important at that split second than looking at the road and seeing me? And again, there was a lot of animosity. And when I realized, again, this was years later, but I thought to myself, how awful would it have been to be the guy driving the minivan? To this day, I don't remember his name. I've never met him. He disappeared off the face of the earth for a while. But to this day, I hold no ill feelings toward him whatsoever, because I thought that would have been pretty awful in its own right, to be driving up the side of the road, playing with your radio, and all of a sudden this kid's head comes through your windshield. How terrible would that have been? And I decided that day that I was going to forgive the guy that hit me. And what I realized was, once I forgave him, once I just made that mental change, that paradigm shift, I was able to move forward with so much more momentum and progress so much quicker. You see, who does it hurt the most when we're not forgiving people? So if someone cuts us off in traffic and we're cursing them out the whole way to the office, do you think they care? Probably not, right? Who does it hurt most when we hold on to those feelings? Not forgiving, not letting go hurts you the most. It hurts you the most. And there's a great quote. So it says, to forgive is to set a prisoner free and realize that that prisoner was you. What I didn't realize was that as I had those negative thoughts about the guy that hit me, as I held on to that animosity, it was keeping a part of me stuck in the past. It was keeping a part of me from moving forward. And as soon as I decided to forgive him, as soon as I made that mental change, I was able to move forward again with so much more momentum and progress so much further. Not forgiving hurts you the most. So those are some things that I've learned and I've implemented into my life wholeheartedly since my accident. And I'll tell you guys, this is a proven testament that this stuff works. So I want to talk a little bit about the year 2020. 2020, January 1st, 2020, I was fired up. I was going to have a huge year. I was going to blow my 2019 numbers out of the water. It was just going to be a great year. January 18th, I fell down my stairs. So I was going down to my gym to work out and I hadn't tied my sneakers yet. I stepped on my shoelace and I went head first down my basement stairs. So full story. And I broke my collarbone. Now, when I say I broke my collarbone broke in half and the bone stuck up out of my shoulder. Not good. February 3rd, I had surgery to fix my collarbone. Now, when I say that I had surgery, they cut my shoulder open, put in this massive metal plate, screwed it into my collarbone, and hooked it into my shoulder joint. Not good. Really not good. Okay, but we can get through that. You know, life's challenges, the adversity, these are all good things. We can get through this. What else do you got for me, life? February 8th, I come back home. I was in the hospital for a few days, get back home. Mid-March, we have a friggin' global pandemic. COVID-19 shuts everything down. Like, how could this year get any worse? But adversity, challenges, failure, these are all good things. My business growth in 2020, 47%. My business grew by 47% in 2020. Even better, I taught myself how to golf truly with one arm. So I put a little driving range in my backyard and I hit 1,000 golf balls a day every day when we were shut down at the start of COVID-19. I taught myself to golf with one arm. I spend even more quality time with my kids, spent more quality time with my family. I spend even more time giving back to the people in my life, and I spend even more time learning. All of the things that helped me be successful through my first recovery and my career into real estate, I hit all those hard. I did all the things I knew would work, and they did. So that's just a little bit about my story, kind of how I got started in real estate. I'm really excited to be spending some time with you guys. So our next session is going to be a full-on goal setting workshop. I want to take how you think about goals and I want to give it a big shake. I want you to walk out of there with a whole new mindset about goal setting. I want you to come out of there with some really great goals for this year, for next year, for the next 10 years, and for your life. And then the next session is going to be a time management workshop. Again, I want to shake up how you think about time management. I want you to build the perfect framework for what your perfect day looks like, what your perfect week looks like, what your perfect month looks like. Whatever you need to make yourself more successful in this business, I want you to come out of that workshop with the framework of what that's going to look like. And then our last session is a keynote I've done a couple times called Peak Performance Energy. I want to share with you guys everything that I do in my life every day to maintain this high, consistent energy level that has really done great things for me. Now we can open it up. I'd love to just have a conversation. You know, I don't know how. Oh, there's my email, guys. If you want to get the book list, send me an email. You know, let's connect on social media. I'd be happy to help you out with anything in your business that I can. And yeah, let's open it up. I don't know how I can unmute people. But yeah, if you have questions or you want to chat about something in your business, I'm all for that. Okay. If not, then that's all good. If you guys do have questions that you think of later, definitely reach out. Yeah, definitely see you next time. I'm looking forward to the 2 workshops. So it's going to be a little bit more interactive. And there's going to be some materials for you guys to work off of. I think it's going to be great. But yeah, let's connect. You know, if there's something that I can help you with in your business or in your life, reach out to me anytime. Appreciate your time, guys.